Hey guys, tonight we dive into the world of medieval fatherhood, where royal dads had absolute power, zero parenting skills, and a knack for traumatizing their children in ways that would make modern therapists weep with job security. Tonight's star, King John of England. Crowned king, cursed dad. So before you settle in and get comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please drop a comment to let me know where you're tuning in from and when it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy journey from across the globe. Now, turn off the lights, switch on a fan if you like that soft background hum, and let's gently slide into tonight's adventure. Imagine you were born in a palace. Massive castles, glittering crowns, dinners full of roasted meats, and warm bread. Sounds dreamy, right? Wrong. Because your dad is King John, the monarch best known for being bad at ruling, worse at parenting. If fatherhood were a test, John didn't just fail. He lit the test on fire, shouted, "Who wrote this nonsense?" Component placement copied from the kid next to him, and still got it wrong. Let's start with a little shock. John once murdered his nephew, young Arthur. Why? Because Arthur had a shot at the throne. Instead of throwing a 13th birthday party, John opted to lock him in a dungeon and forget he exists. A rather extreme parenting strategy. And what about his son? Little Henry, who would grow up to be Henry III, was left with a lovely inheritance, a bankrupt kingdom, rebellious nobles, angry peasants, and a Magna Carta everyone read, but no one followed. Think your homework's hard? Try running a nation your dad turned into a flaming disaster casserole. John wasn't the kind of dad who went camping or told bedtime stories. He was the kind of dad who vanished for 9 months and reappeared to yell at you for not knowing how to ride a horse barehanded. Even his wife, Henry's mother, didn't get much peace. Queen Isabella was locked in a castle for nearly 10 years. Not because she committed a crime, it's probably just because John felt like it. If family love is a garden, John was the goat that tore down the fence and ate all the tulips. He also had a knack for financial conversations. John taxed everything: land, homes, chickens, breathing. Blink too slowly at dinner. He'd probably fine you for unauthorized rest. And when legal means ran out, he sold church offices, forced widows to remarry men he picked, and charged them money not to. Yes, you heard that right. He taxed singleness. Henry, John's son, grew up in a world with zero affection and maximum chaos. A typical day for Henry might include signing emergency decrees, dodging axes from angry earls, and wondering if he was allowed to eat dinner before praying 3 times for the glory of House Plantagenet. You might be thinking, surely he had some redeeming moments. Nope. Legend has it that John once tried to dump the entire royal treasury into a swamp while fleeing a rebellion. Not a metaphor. He dropped his crown and the kingdom's wealth into a river while running away. And then, he died of exhaustion and dysentery. A fitting if rather gross finale. So, the takeaway. If you've ever complained that your dad forgot your birthday, at least he didn't sell bishoprics, imprison your mom in a tower, or murder your cousin because they had potential. Compared to King John, nearly anyone qualifies as Father of the Year. So tonight, as you close your eyes, be grateful that your dad doesn't rule a kingdom, starve nephews in dungeons, and didn't leave you a civil war as part of his estate plan. But don't fall asleep just yet. The parade of medieval disaster dads is far from over. In the next part, we'll meet a father who is even more famous than John, with more wives than you've changed your bed sheets this year. A king who thought beheading was a reasonable solution to family problems. As you already know, this story is just getting started. Do you think your dad's strict for wanting good grades, no backtalk, and a 9 p.m. curfew? Try being the child of Henry VIII, the king famous for having 6 wives, his church, and a list of children who mostly lived their entire lives in emotional distress. King Henry wasn't the type of father to ask, "Did you eat enough?" He was more like, "Have you served enough political purpose? If not, I'll just erase you from the family line." Seriously. Henry began his fatherhood journey by marrying Catherine of Aragon, who gave birth to a daughter named Mary. Henry wanted a prince, but life handed him a princess fluent in Latin and exceptionally gifted at silent sighing. He waited and waited, and then divorced Catherine over professional incompatibility. When the Pope said no, Henry created the Church of England to legalize divorce. Yes. Your dad might yell when you forget to do the dishes. Henry VIII built an entire religion. Then he married Anne Boleyn, the mother of Elizabeth, who would later become Queen Elizabeth I. But when Anne didn't produce a son, Henry had her executed. The charge, adultery, the evidence, let's say it wouldn't hold up in any court today. So Elizabeth grew up with a mother who'd been beheaded and a father who remarried just days later like he was switching dishes at a buffet. We're talking about a man who cleaned up family memories with a guillotine. Wife number 3, Jane Seymour, finally gave him a son named Edward, whom Henry immediately treated like royalty incarnate while practically ignoring his 2 daughters. If the Tudor family had a group chat, Henry would only reply to Edward. As for Mary and Elizabeth, declared illegitimate and removed from the line of succession. Do you think being unfriended by your dad on Facebook is bad? Try being unprinted in medieval England. And don't think Henry's cruelty was just on paper. He was a master of family faction drama. Sometimes, he'd invite Mary back to court, only to exile her again. Sometimes, he'd show affection toward Elizabeth, then suddenly ignore her, as if she were invisible. In other words, Henry's moods were like London weather. Sunny in the morning, raining by lunch, snowing at dinner, and a full-blown emotional hurricane by bedtime. Edward, the golden boy, didn't have long to enjoy it. Crowned king at 9, he was frail, sickly, and barely old enough to understand why he wasn't allowed to play outside like the other kids. Meanwhile, Mary took the throne after Edward died, carrying a suitcase full of repressed emotions, and Elizabeth grew up constantly wondering if she'd even be allowed to stay alive. That's Henry's legacy. A royal family where being temporarily erased from existence was just part of growing up. A household where surviving puberty was considered a win. The saddest part? With all his volatility, control issues, and impulsiveness, Henry still believed he was a good dad. He once told Mary, "I only want you to be safe." In reality, safe meant silent, obedient, and never marrying anyone without his royal stamp of approval. It is the medieval version of dad tracks your location 24/7. Henry didn't parent with warmth or softness. He parented like a political screenwriter, where every character could be cut if they didn't fit the script. To him, children weren't people with feelings. They were chess pieces on his power board. So if you've ever felt pressure when your parents asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" take comfort. At least your dad didn't have a guillotine on standby, a law to strip your inheritance, or a custom-built church to make your disinheritance spiritually official. But hold up. It's not over. If you think Henry VIII was the worst dad in English history, brace yourself. Next, we meet a father with no throne and no army, yet terrifying enough to make his kids want to join a monastery voluntarily. A peasant dad from the countryside who could make his children suffocate with just a look and a broom. We'll meet him right after you catch your breath. Not every bad dad in the Middle Ages came with a castle, guards, and an ex-wife collection. Some just had a field, a yoke, and a glare that could make a child abandon the thought of ever asking, "Dad, can I have a day off? Tonight, we leave behind the glittering royal palace and step into a small thatched cottage on the edge of a village. Here lives a man named Thomas, a simple farmer. If simple means believing that sleeping past sundown is a sign of moral decay. Thomas is the kind of father who can plow 4 rows, rebuild a fence, and cook porridge with his eyes, all at once. To him, children aren't joys or blessings. They're unpaid, miniature laborers. His eldest son, little William, started working before he could pull his hand out of a boiling pot of porridge. While other kids were playing hide and seek, William was entrusted with goose herding, a task which, according to Thomas, teaches you how to run a household. Thomas's goose management theory has yet to be recognized by modern business schools. Each morning, Thomas wakes the family not by calling them, but by not calling them. He'd tap a wooden spoon against the iron pot, and anyone still in bed was immediately accused of wasting God's oxygen. Breakfast, cold porridge. Lunch, colder porridge. Dinner, porridge with a splash of disappointment. And if a child ever dared to ask, "Dad, do I get a day off today?" Thomas would respond with his signature stare. Low damage, deep trauma. That's not all. Thomas believed in character development through weather. Raining, dig holes, sunny, haul water, stormy. Perfect. Let's try planting beans. Rest was a luxury item, lumped in with owning a bed, wearing unpatched clothes, and being allowed to breathe without being assigned a task. The funny thing is, Thomas didn't hate his kids. Quite the opposite. He actually cared a lot. It's just that instead of saying, "I love you," he'd rather teach you to tell the difference between fresh cow dung and aged cow dung. Because in life, there are 2 kinds of people: those who can tell and those who fail. This father didn't need sweet words. He showed affection through task assignments. The more he loved you, the more water you hauled, the more firewood you carried, and, if you were truly blessed, the honor of mucking out the pigsty every Sunday morning. Sometimes you might think, surely he had a softer side? He did. It appeared when he sat by the fire, whittling a block of wood, recounting his youth. How he was made to pull weeds before his baby teeth came in. And then he'd look at you and say, "Which is why. Tomorrow, we rise early." Thomas had no throne and no personal church, but he carried the authority of someone born in spiritual armor, already memorizing the agricultural calendar by heart. To him, a good child stayed silent, worked correctly, and understood that feeling full was an emotion, not a physical condition. Yet within that harshness, there was an odd warmth. On winter nights, Thomas would quietly rekindle the fire after everyone had fallen asleep, check the thatched roof for leaks, and sometimes leave a roasted potato on the hearth. No words, just there. That was his way of saying he cared. Medieval commando dad style. And you know what? Even though he didn't say, "I love you," never wrote you a letter, never remembered your birthday, he remembered every mistake you made. And in an age with 0 parenting manuals, that's kind of impressive. But I don't think Thomas was a rare case. In the next part, we'll meet a father with a vivid imagination. So vivid he believed demons possessed his child, just for being left-handed. A man who'd march his kid to the priest, the exorcist, and, if needed, the hounds to ensure the child returns to the light. Are you left-handed? If so, congratulations. You've just officially become a suspected witch, at least by the standards of your dad, a 14th century peasant named Geoffrey, who specialized in turning tiny things into massive problems. Geoffrey was the type who believed that bread falling butter side down was a bad omen, that a rooster crowing at sunset meant ghosts, and that if his child held a hoe with his left hand, the devil must have planted the idea. Logic. Unnecessary. A little shiver was all the proof he needed. His poor son, Robin, was a normal, well-behaved boy. Except for one thing. He wrote with his left hand. An unforgivable sin in Jeffrey's eyes. Because who on earth uses the devil's hand to record the turnip inventory? At first, Jeffrey tried gentle correction, tying Robin's left hand down at night. The result? Robin couldn't sleep, wrote worse, and eventually started secretly writing with his foot. His father didn't laugh. Jeffrey didn't do jokes. Next came the priest. Enter exorcism attempt number 1. Nothing too dramatic. Some holy water, prayers, and confused looks. Robin just wanted to go home and eat porridge. The priest was baffled. Jeffrey took notes with his right hand, looking very serious. When the exorcism failed, Jeffrey moved on to plan B, intimidation by animals. He took Robin to the dog pen, pointed at a sleepy gray dog, and declared, "If you write with your left hand again, you'll end up like him." Robin didn't understand. The dog didn't understand, but Jeffrey was convinced. Eventually, Robin, exhausted, pretended to switch to his right hand. Jeffrey beamed and said, "You've been saved." Then, he nailed a horseshoe over the door, just in case. Robin sighed again. This father wasn't cruel, not malicious. He was just deeply superstitious, overly confident, and utterly uninterested in second opinions. To him, being a dad meant knowing everything, even when you don't. Jeffrey was the embodiment of a world where lack of information plus too much anxiety equaled parental panic. And in an era where science hadn't yet defeated the magical wheel of nonsense, and every oddity was blamed on evil spirits, a left-handed child truly was a spiritual challenge. Still, Robin grew up. He learned to write with both hands. He survived all the adjustments. He also developed a special skill, writing while sneakily checking to see if his father was watching, a talent valuable in any century. So if your parents ever forced you to switch hands, change your hairstyle, or ban you from wearing red because it's too fiery, just remember, at least they didn't call in a priest because you held your chopsticks in the wrong hand. But if you think Jeffrey was the worst dad in the village, hold that thought, because next up, we'll meet a father who was rich, influential, respected, and who dragged his entire family to court over an inheritance dispute. The medieval version of family drama that kept the whole village gossiping through winter. Yes, you guessed it. Money has never been great at buying love, especially in the Middle Ages. Another father lived in the village next to Jeffrey. The exorcism-happy dad with a left-handed child. Not superstitious, not impoverished, but highly skilled in the art of family drama. His name was Lord Ambrose, a middle-ranking nobleman with land, a modest castle, a long beard, and 3 children quietly bracing themselves for an inheritance war. Ambrose wasn't the kind of bad father who didn't care. On the contrary, he cared deeply about what he'd leave behind after death. And the older he got, the more convinced he became that a father's love should be measured in acres. And so, the stage was set. After a breakfast of oat porridge and boiled carrots one fine day, he summoned his 3 children to the great hall. The scene resembled a prehistoric reality show version. Who Wants to Inherit? Season 1. He said, "My children, I want to know which of you loves me the most. Whoever is most sincere shall receive the largest share of land." The air thickened like a pot of mushroom stew that's been simmering for 3 days. The eldest, Edmund, was a smooth talker. "Father, my love for you is like a bountiful harvest, abundant and ripe." Ambrose nodded. I jotted it down. Edmund, poetic flair. The second, Agnes, said, "I love you as the geese love clean water, loyal and tireless." Ambrose chuckled. Agnes, vivid imagery. Then came the youngest, Lionel, a quiet, bookish lad with a practical streak. He said, "Father, I love you as a son loves his father. No more, no less. Not for land." Ambrose froze. "What did you say?" He stared at Lionel as if he'd just announced plans to become a freelance poet. And guess what? Lionel was disinherited. Completely. It's not a clay bowl. Not a single chicken. Fuming, Ambrose split the land between Edmund and Agnes. They were thrilled, until things unraveled. Because when a father divides property based on flattery, sibling love tends to crumble like poorly baked rye bread. Edmund built fences. Agnes demanded hedges. They stopped speaking. And Lionel? He left the village carrying a small bag and a fully intact sense of self-worth. A year later, Ambrose fell ill. On his deathbed, he summoned his children. "I feel so empty," he said. Agnes was too busy arguing with Edmund in the courtyard. No one came. No one listened. Lionel was far away, teaching village children, living simply, and needing no inheritance. And so, Lord Ambrose, the man who once owned enough land to host a year-round potato festival, died surrounded by unsigned papers, contested estates, and two children who wouldn't look each other in the eye. Had a medieval lawyer been nearby, he'd have sighed and said, "I've seen this in every century." Ambrose's story proves that being a father isn't the hard part. Being a wise distributor of land is. And that love should never be measured in square footage or traded for flowery words. If you've ever felt your parents played favorites, remember they didn't host a compliment contest for plot A7 of the turnip field. But don't leave yet. In the next part, we'll meet a father who didn't divide the land, didn't demand affection, didn't force his kids to recite poetry. He abandoned the entire family to join a traveling band. Yes, you heard that right. A dad who walked out on fatherhood to play string instruments and juggle at local markets. And one day he came back, with a monkey and a song. Forget the dads who handed out farmland like Tet gifts. Tonight, we meet Hugh, a father who lived an ordinary life. Until one fine day, he looked up at the sky, heard a distant lute, and declared, "I don't belong here." Then he picked up his instrument and left. At first, his wife, Margaret, thought, "He's probably gone to the market." By day 3. Maybe he stopped by the next village to buy breeding hens. By day 7. All right, he's not coming back, is he? Hugh didn't vanish. He just joined a troupe of traveling performers. A company of 6 adults, 1 flamboyantly dressed child, 2 dancing goats, and a monkey with a somewhat competent sense of rhythm. They sang, juggled, told stories at the fair, and slept in tents that smelled of hay and human effort. And Hugh, he adored it. He played the lute, sang songs of love, adventure, and, well, absolutely nothing about child-rearing. Meanwhile, back home, Margaret was patching trousers for 3 kids and muttering the legendary line, "Your father is basically a song with legs." The children didn't quite understand what was going on. The youngest, Thomas, once asked, "Mom, did Dad become a knight?" Margaret sighed. "No, sweetie. Your father became an artist." About a year later, Hugh suddenly returned to the village. No letter, no warning. He just appeared in the town square, standing on a wooden crate, draped in a red tasseled cloak, holding a lute, with a drum-playing monkey in a hat by his side. He beamed and said, "I bring music to the people, and a bag of chestnuts for the children." The townsfolk clapped. The music was good. His wife, standing at a distance, hands on hips, eyes shooting springtime lightning. The kids are perplexed. Hugh stayed for 2 days. He told tales of towns and taverns, of being chased by guards for singing the wrong anthem, and of rainy nights spent under bridges with the monkey. Then he said, "This was just a visit. My heart belongs to the road." And off he went, light as the chorus of a sad ballad. Maybe Hugh didn't mean to be a bad father. He just chose the life of a dreamer, forgetting that someone had to worry about firewood, rice, and laundry back home. He saw freedom as sacred and duty as a refrain he didn't want to repeat. Occasionally, he sent letters back, usually filled with offbeat poetry and advice like, "Don't let the kids eat too much cilantro." No one knew why. Once he even mailed the monkey. Little Alice, the youngest daughter, was thrilled. The monkey, however, was not suited for village life. After 3 days, it climbed the roof and refused to come down. The family gave it to the priest, who later switched careers, claiming, "I can't handle the drumming at night." Hugh might be the poster dad for a specific type, the wandering father. Not bad out of cruelty, but out of over-romanticism. He loved the open road more than the family table, the stage more than bedtime stories, and believed that gifting a song could replace teaching a child to count. If your dad ever got so caught up in being his authentic self that he forgot your birthday, don't feel too bad. At least he didn't send a monkey in a vest as proof of love. And if you think Hugh is the strangest case yet, brace yourself. Next, we'll meet a royal father with limitless power, who decided to raise his kids like lab rats. No cuddles, no lessons, just silent observation, to see if children, raised without hearing human speech, would invent a language of their own. Yes, an experiment on his kids in a castle, next to the pigeon coops. If there were an award for strangest father of the Middle Ages, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire would win by a landslide. Not because he was cruel, but because he was just too curious. Frederick wasn't your typical king obsessed only with thrones, wars, or collecting antique axes. He loved research, experiments, and questions no one else dared to ask. Great traits, if you're a scientist. But if you happen to be his child, our condolences. One day, Frederick famously wondered, if a child grows up in complete silence, no one speaks to them, no one teaches them any language, would they invent their own language? Fascinating question? Maybe. Is it worth trying on your kids? Not Frederick. And so, he ordered a group of infants, some said to be his own, or distant royal kin, or just unlucky test subjects, to be taken to a remote monastery. There, the nuns were strictly forbidden to speak, smile, sing lullabies, or tell bedtime stories. Their only job was basic care, feeding, bathing, diapering, but under one condition: absolute silence. All in the name of science. The result? The children didn't invent a magical new language. They became sad, frail, despairing. Because, as you probably guessed, babies need more than milk and dry nappies. They need to be held. They need to hear voices. They need laughter. They need to be human. Frederick called it a failed scientific study. Historians call it a catastrophic failure in parenting. See, Frederick didn't beat his kids. He didn't run off with a traveling show. He didn't tie anyone's left hand behind their back. But he forgot that being a father isn't about measuring your child's linguistic evolution. It's about talking to them, catching them when they fall, and not turning them into experiments to satisfy your curiosity. And Frederick wasn't done. He once made 2 groups of people eat the same meal, forcing one group to jog and the other to nap. Then he dissected them to compare digestion. Yes, you heard that right. Sorry. History remembers him as a scientific innovator. But his children? They probably just wanted a dad who'd put the research notebook down and laugh at their 6-legged horse drawing. So, if you ever felt your parents were too strict about your grades, at least they didn't observe you like a lab rat in silence. But don't get too gloomy. Because up next, we meet a father with no education, laboratory, or royal power who became famous across the region for threatening his children with homemade prophecies. No whips, no punishment charts, just ancestral curses. Welcome to a tiny village where there are more turnips than people, and where your father's words carry the weight of thunder and lightning. This is the hometown of Oswin, a farmer who from a distance might seem perfectly ordinary, but live under his roof long enough, and you'll discover his extraordinary power. Not strength, not status, but the uncanny ability to deliver family prophecies whenever he was displeased. Example: drop a bowl? Oswin would stare intensely and declare, "An ancestor just knocked a star out of the sky. Next year's crops will wither." Yawn at the dinner table? Yawning like that in winter invites frost into your dreams. No one knew where he got these sayings. A wandering monk? His imagination? It didn't matter. What mattered was that Oswin's 3 children lived under a constant cloud of spiritual anxiety. His eldest daughter, Edith, once dared to challenge him at age 10. Why? She refused to believe that touching an onion before sunset would summon a thunderstorm. Oswin sat down, eyes distant, and murmured, "You've just made your great-great-grandfather turn his back on the moonlit river." Edith didn't touch onions again for 6 years. His youngest son, Leo, developed a near obsession with stepping out of the house each morning with his right foot first. Because, as Oswin warned, he who leaves with the left foot will feel his heart slow with the years. At 12, Leo still didn't know what that meant, but he wasn't about to risk it. Strangely enough, Oswin wasn't angry or cruel. He never shouted, never punished. He prophesied, quietly, consistently, with maximum long-term emotional impact. In his mind, he was probably passing down ancestral wisdom, but in reality, he was creating a kind of domestic superstition zone where every sneeze was an omen, and every stubbed toe could ripple through the maternal bloodline. Edith dropped a clay jug one day while carrying water from the well. Oswin approached, not to scold, but to pick up a shard, hold it to the sunlight, and whisper, "This is a sign. The one you marry will have uneven eyebrows." The entire village paused. From that day on, Edith began inspecting everyone's eyebrows at the market. She still hasn't married. If you grew up hearing things like, "Eat too many sweets and worms will grow in your stomach," or "Don't go outside without a hat, or your head will fill with rainwater," congratulations, you experienced the light version of the Oswin household. The irony? Oswin didn't believe in anyone else's predictions. When a traveling fortune teller once passed through the village, he folded his arms and said, "The one who truly sees the future doesn't charge a fee." In other words, he genuinely believed only he had the right to interpret fate. It's a weirdly exclusive system, but perfectly on brand for medieval dads obsessed with soft power. And so, Oswin's children grew up as if every move they made was logged in an unwritten family prophecy chronicle, readable only by their father. If you think your dad saying, "You'll understand when you're older," was intense, try living in a household where every casual remark might be a warning, a curse, or both. But brace yourself, because in the next part, the drama levels up. We'll meet a nobleman father who saw parenting not as love, but as an investment contract. No threats, no scolding, just a portfolio of children he intended to profit from. Raising a child wasn't for bonding, but for negotiating the highest marriage offer possible. If you've ever felt like you were just the family's pride, wait until you meet someone whose daughter was entered in a ledger, under assets. We've met dads obsessed with prophecy, science, and puppetry. But tonight, Meet Lord Reginald, a medieval nobleman devoted to one thing only: return on investment. And no, he didn't invest in horses, not farmland, not a vineyard. He invested in his daughter, specifically his eldest, Eleanor. By the time Eleanor was 3, Lord Reginald had already scribbled into his leather-bound notebook: potential marriage alliance with House Montclair. Dowry minimal. Needs improvement in French. Eleanor was trained to become a top-tier marriage candidate from the moment she could walk. No wobbling, no slurping soup. Every morning began with the noble woman nod exam. Tilt the head 15 degrees, maintain a soft gaze, and absolutely no heavy breathing. Reginald wasn't cruel. He never yelled. But whenever Eleanor did something human, he would jot down, eliminate frown when thinking, appears undignified. Laughter exceeding 3 seconds suggests undesirable personality traits. Once, Eleanor asked, "Father, may I draw a picture?" Reginald studied her, then replied, "If it increases your bridal value." She drew a tree. He said, "A tree has roots. So should your family pedigree." Eleanor's engagement portfolio was thicker than a legal manuscript by the time she was 14. Suitor names were cataloged with notes like Montclair, wealthy, stern, might tolerate her temperament; Valois, handsome, but family delayed dowry payments in 1287; Beaumont, father temperamental, may resist renegotiation clauses. Every family dinner was a boardroom briefing. Every conversation was a rehearsal for hosting nobles. Eleanor didn't live in a home. She lived in a showroom. And the saddest part? She was good at it. She learned French. She danced gracefully. She smiled on cue. She poured tea with 0 spillage. But after every "well done, my dear," all she heard was the soft rustle of money. Reginald wasn't a villain. He truly believed he was securing her future. In his mind, marrying into power was the pinnacle of fatherly love. No one ever told him love doesn't have a resale value. At 17, Eleanor's engagement to the Montclair was finalized. The ceremony occurred in a velvet-draped hall, surrounded by wine, handshakes, and the hum of negotiated terms. She smiled throughout. But as she stepped into the carriage bound for her new life, she turned to look at her father, beaming like a merchant who'd closed a lucrative deal. And she whispered, "I hope the profit was worth it." A servant heard. No one dared speak of it. So, if you've ever felt pressured by parental expectations or constant comparisons, just be glad you didn't have to prove your emotional worth through the liquidity of your lineage. But don't rush to crown Reginald the most calculating father in history. Next, we meet a man who made no calculations at all. No plans, no guidance, no presence. A father so passive, so silent, his children had to learn how to grow up before they ever learned how to spell their names. If you've ever complained that your dad never opened up, never asked how you were doing, never said "I love you," then take a quiet moment for Alric, a medieval father known throughout the village for his legendary level of silence. Alric wasn't cold. He wasn't harsh. He didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He just didn't speak. Almost ever. And not because he was too busy. Just because, in his words, there's nothing that needs saying. When his wife gave birth to their first child, neighbors came to visit and asked, "What's the baby's name?" Alric shrugged. For 3 days, the child was called the Little One. By age 5, the boy named himself Willem. Alric nodded. No approval, no rejection. Just a nod. Willem grew up in a warm house, clean, with food and blankets. But no advice. There was no, "Dad, what should I do?" Because the answer was always a distant stare. and a sip of water. When Willem took his first steps, nothing. When he fell, Alric stood up, glanced over, and walked away. When Willem drew a picture in charcoal on the wall, Alric looked at it, then quietly went to chop firewood. At age 9, Willem asked, "Dad, have I disappointed you?" Alric looked at him, blinked, then picked up his axe and left the room. Willem learned everything by watching other fathers. They taught their kids to trim bean vines, greet elders, and stitch socks with wooden needles. Alric? So silent villagers suspected he'd taken a vow. But no. One time he coughed, and the whole village jumped. Legend says a sparrow dropped from the sky, thinking the earth was ending. By 14, Willem could plant rice, hunt rabbits, patch trousers, and greet people with just the right amount of confidence. But one thing remained unclear. What did his father think? Did he love him? Was he proud? Did he want to hug him? No one knew. Willem once wrote a letter to communicate indirectly. He left it on the table. The next morning, the letter had been slid under the leg of a wobbly chair to balance it. Silence can be golden, but in Alric's case, it was a sealed room with no windows. A space where a child had to stumble in the dark, guess, and hope they were doing it right. No right, no wrong. Just silence. Willem grew into a good man, quiet, but not mute. When he had his child, he held them close and whispered, "You won't have to guess with me." And perhaps that was the only real gift Alric passed down. This is a perfect example of what not to repeat. So, if you've ever thought, "My dad never says much," just remember. At least he replies to your messages. Alric could sit through an entire dinner without sipping soup simply because there was nothing to say. But if you think that's as melancholy as fatherhood gets, hold on. Because in the next part, we meet one of the most famous fathers in history, a man who launched a crusade and brought his son along as if it were a slightly extended camping trip. A father who believed holy duty and family bonding could be combined in a religious war across continents. You know those father-child bonding moments, gardening together, fishing trips, baking cookies? Yeah. Godfrey de Bouillon was not that kind of dad. Godfrey was one of the earliest leaders of the First Crusade in the late 11th century. A brave knight, devoutly religious, and extremely decisive. And in his mind, there was no better way to strengthen the father-son relationship than taking his boy along to conquer Jerusalem. No child-sized armor, no junior version battles. Just horses, blood, swords, dust, and sacred conviction. His son, Baldwin, just wanted to learn how to ride a horse and write his name in a straight line. Instead of learning the alphabet, he was taught siege warfare and how to stay upright in armor heavier than his body. Imagine you're 13. You haven't even grown your wisdom teeth. Then, one sunny morning, your dad knocks on the door. "Son, wake up. I think it's time you learned theology and how to throw a spear." And so it began. Father and son trekked across Europe, on foot and horseback, sleeping on dirt, eating hard rations, dodging flying arrows. Each morning they didn't brush their teeth. They asked, "So, who are we besieging today?" To Godfrey, there was nothing odd about this. In his eyes, it was a spiritual retreat, a long pilgrimage. You'd become a man if you survived it. Or, at the very least, a collection of sacred memories. Strangely, he wasn't cruel. He genuinely believed this was how you teach a boy courage, faith, and divine national service. But Baldwin, he just wanted to learn how to make potato stew and ride a pony without falling off. One day, during a mock battle, Baldwin dropped his shield. Godfrey looked at him and said, "Lesson 1. When you drop your shield, the enemy doesn't wait for you to pick it up. Lesson 2. Don't cry. Your blood's still inside you. Lesson 3. If you feel cold, that means you're alive. Praise the Lord. As the campaign dragged on, Baldwin quietly wondered, do other dads do this? Or is mine the only one who thinks puberty is the right time for a religious war? After months of trudging through the Holy Land, sleeping in tents, and eating bread so stale it could block arrows, Baldwin became a tough, quiet teen who could tell the difference between the smell of a strong horse and a tired one. Finally, they arrived at Jerusalem. As they stood on a hill overlooking the city, Godfrey placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder and said, "You see, son? It was all worth it." Baldwin nodded softly, then passed out from heatstroke. They returned from the crusade covered in glory, scratched armor, and a healthy batch of physical and emotional scars. Baldwin never went to war again. Instead, he opened a small roadside inn specializing in oat cakes and peace. So if your dad ever pressured you to go hiking, fishing, or play a sport when all you wanted was to sleep in, remember, at least he didn't hand you a sword and march you through Syria to find spiritual enlightenment. And if you think that was the peak of fatherly life lessons, hold on. Because next, we'll meet a father who didn't swing swords or stage battles, but became legendary for his moral education methods, punishing his children by bringing them before the entire village, and letting the townsfolk rate their behavior. Yes, public, performance-based, parenting. In a quiet little village nestled between oak forests and mustard fields, lived a father named Cedric, a man who never raised a hand shouted, never stormed out, but who had one very peculiar hobby, turning every one of his child's mistakes into a public event. Cedric was the village chief, a model citizen, always clean, punctual, and greeting everyone by name with a nod that whispered, "I know what you did last week." He believed in justice, in community, and above all, in the idea that raising children should be a village-wide responsibility. His son, 10-year-old Thomas, once dropped a loaf of bread on the ground. A minor mishap. But to Cedric, no mistake was too small not to be formally addressed before the village. The next morning at the market, Cedric had already set up a small wooden platform. A sign beside it read, "Charge, waste in food, 1 loaf, dirtied." Thomas, head hung low, was invited to stand atop the platform. Villagers gathered. No yelling, no mockery, just solemn nodding like they were attending a medieval poetry reading. Cedric stepped forward, holding the thick family ledger, voice grave. "Good people, today we face a small mistake with great meaning. For every crumb on the ground is a mother's sweat, a miller's flour, a woodsman's firewood." At that moment, Thomas would have gladly turned into a turnip to burrow into the dirt and disappear. These trial sessions didn't come with harsh punishments. Instead, the villagers offered gentle but cutting feedback. He should learn to hold bread with both hands. Always thank the loaf before eating, so it won't jump away. Next time, wash your hands before touching food. A wise older woman concluded, "He's sweet but clumsy. It's worse than a whipping." Thomas once asked his mother, "Can't Dad just scold me in private?" She sighed, "Your father believes in transparency." Odd as it was, Cedric genuinely wanted his child to improve. He believed learning was more effective in the town square, with witnesses, live commentary, and sometimes farewell pastries after judgment was passed. As a result, Thomas became exceptionally good at predicting potential infractions. Before doing anything, he'd pause to think, would this get me publicly reviewed by Uncle Gervin the rope maker? And no, Cedric didn't just do this for big mistakes. Once, Thomas accidentally pulled weeds from the wrong row in the garden. The next day, charge, disturbing the moral balance of vegetable rows. A accompanied by a 12-minute lecture titled "Straight Rows Reflect a Straight Soul." Cedric never realized that his son didn't remember the speeches. He only remembered the sound of wind rushing past his ears while standing on that raised wooden shame box. But Cedric was convinced. Every gaze from the community is a droplet of moral water for the young soul's garden. Strangely enough, Thomas did grow up to be pretty decent. Maybe thanks to those public life lessons. Or maybe it was because he was too exhausted to make another mistake again. So if you ever felt like your parents made a big deal about your slip-ups in front of the extended family, remember, at least you weren't standing in the middle of the town market getting critiques from Granny Egg Seller and Uncle Dung the Rope Guy. But don't laugh just yet, because we'll meet a different kind of father in the next part. Not a mason, not a noble, not a village chief, but a physician. A man who loved science so profoundly that he used his children to test homemade concoctions, mildew-based hair dye, beard tonic from mashed turnips, and cough syrup made from goose fat mixed with wine. Welcome to a tiny town where the air always smells faintly of herbal salves. Every household owns at least one dancing chicken, and tucked beside the stream is a wooden cottage unlike any other, home of Master Percival, a celebrated healer, and father of 3 mysteriously luminous children. Now, Percival wasn't a bad father in the usual sense. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't distant. He adored his kids. He just adored herbal medicine slightly more. He loved folk remedies and mushroom tinctures and firmly believed that authentic learning often came after sprouting a few mysterious rashes. His eldest son, young Hamlin, was once a perfectly healthy child until the day Percival tested a beard-growing serum made from aged turnip, dried pollen, and a few drops of ancient healthy water. The result? No beard, but an explosion of arm hair on only the left side. Percival wrote in his journal with great care, uneven efficacy, mild social confusion for subject. Hamlin wore long sleeves all summer and claimed he was training to join the lion cult. Middle child Marion once had her scalp massaged with a hair-enhancing formula made from soaked oak bark and wine. Should it work, Percival explained, I shall be rich. The result? Her hair curled into a frizzy pastry-like dome. Marion cried. Percival noted, unusual texture, maybe repurposed as local fashion trend. The youngest, little Tibby, didn't even know she was taking trial number 47 inches every time she sipped her cough syrup. Instead of honey and mint, Percival had concocted a mix of goose fat, cider vinegar, and willow bark. Tibby's cough vanished, but she sang for 3 days straight. Percival beamed. Unexpected side effect, village-grade opera vocals. And no, he didn't stop there. Once he tried homemade tooth dye, yes, tooth dye, to enhance the smile. Charcoal ash, black pollen. Hamlin showed up to school with smoke-gray teeth. The teacher sighed. Percival scribbled, aesthetic results polarizing, community feedback pending. Strangely enough, he never did these things out of neglect. Quite the opposite. He believed his children were pioneers. The first generation was raised alongside the rise of grassroots medicine. No one dared call him mad, because the man could cure a stomachache in 5 minutes, whip up a fever remedy from scratch, and once saved old Tilda after she mistakenly ate a glowing mushroom. But with his kids, Percival often forgot that love doesn't require dosage instructions, that children don't need to be case studies, that "I love you" shouldn't be followed by "now drink this and describe the tingling." Once, when Marion had a fever, Percival panicked. He dashed about mixing teas, heating herbs, drawing baths, and firing off questions like a medical inquisitor. Where do you feel coldest? Did you dream of horses? Do your teeth ache when you think about the color purple? Marion said, I want you to sit with me and tell me a story, not quiz me like it's a test." Percival fell silent. For the first time, he didn't write a thing. He just sat beside her, held her hand, and told the story of the time he tested a backache remedy made of chili powder and fell out of bed with numb legs for 6 hours. So if your parents ever made you drink ginger tea, shoved eucalyptus up your nose, or rubbed hard-boiled eggs on your forehead, remember, at least they didn't slather your skin in goose grease mixed with apple wine while checking to see if you glow in the dark. And if you think that's the peak of well-meaning but wildly off-target parenting, it's not even close. Because up next, we'll meet a retired knight who believed teaching virtue began with battlefield survival skills. No crib, no teddy bears, only a wooden spear, a pint-sized shield, and the immortal rule: if you fall, you get up. If you can't get up, you crawl, but you do not cry. In a village tucked between pine forests and far from anything resembling pampering, lived a father named Sir Bertrand, a retired knight who had survived 3 major battles, at least 7 helmet-denting blows, and more than 1 very strategic fake death. When the wars ended, Bertrand returned home, hung up his sword, shelved his armor, and chose a new full-time mission: fatherhood. But to Bertrand, fatherhood didn't mean cuddles and fairy tales. It meant recruitment and tactical training, in child-sized form. His small son, Rowan, age 4, received his first ever gift, a wooden spear. Along with the solemn warning, "This is not for play. This is for defense." Rowan hadn't even learned to tie his shoes before learning lesson 1. If you don't know how to hold your stance, you will fall. And battlefields do not come with pillows. Breakfast, thick porridge, in silence. Lunch, breathing exercises, so you don't lose rhythm when attacked. Evenings, story time, but not with dragons and magic. With siege tactics involving pickled radishes and sharpened bamboo. Once, Rowan tripped and cried while playing tag with the chickens. Bertrand emerged from the stables, knelt beside him, stared deep into his soul and said, "If you can cry, you can scream. If you scream, the enemy will find you." Rowan stopped crying. Then, I spent the rest of the week practicing how to whisper. When villagers asked why he didn't let his son play like other children, Bertrand replied, "The battlefield is the biggest game of all, and no one wins it happily." Yes, it sounds harsh, but Bertrand did love his son, fiercely. His heart, tough as old chainmail, still had a soft spot. It was buried under 4 training drill layers and 37 survival principles. Rowan didn't hate his father, but he hated silent night readiness training, where he had to sit motionless in the courtyard for an hour to become a shadow. Bertrand would say, "If you are the shadow, you cannot be stabbed." 5th birthday gift, a steel helmet. 6th birthday, a concise history of Norman defense tactics. 7th, a rare compliment. "You fall properly now." But then, one day, Rowan quietly set down his wooden spear, walked to his father and said, "I don't want to go to war. I want to be a baker." Bertrand looked at him for a long time. He didn't speak. For a minute, heavy as an anvil, he stared. Then, finally, he nodded and said, "Bakers need strategy too. Ovens show no mercy." He turned and walked away slowly, but before he vanished behind the doorway, Rowan saw it. His father smiled, just a little, but it was real. See, love isn't always warm hugs and sugar cubes. Sometimes it's barrel rolls in the cold dirt to dodge imaginary arrows. And if you ever thought your dad was strict because he made you cook your eggs or bike to school, just be glad he didn't teach you how to fake death by lunchtime. But don't be too quick to name Bertrand the toughest dad in the lineup. In the next part, we meet a father who didn't bother with drills, speeches, or guidance. He simply tested. He threw his child into a survival scenario to let nature awaken their instincts. No sword, no shield, just a forest. Welcome to a land nestled between 3 mountain ranges and blessed with 7 different kinds of fog, where the people believe in only 2 things. Never let turnips grow too tall. And a child isn't truly grown until they've gotten lost in the forest at least once. Here lives a man named Thorn. Tall, quiet, thick-bearded, and often staring into the distance, possibly at nothing. He is the father of Nico, an 11-year-old boy, bright, quick-witted, and, most importantly, not yet tossed into the woods alone. A critical shortcoming of Thorn's parenting standards. One foggy morning, Thorn woke Nico up and handed him a small pouch containing 1 piece of stale bread, 1 dull knife, and a short length of rope. No map, no instructions, just a single sentence. Today, you learn to survive. See you, if you make it back. Nico thought his father was joking. Thorn didn't joke. He led his son to the forest's edge, clapped him on the shoulder, turned away, and began playing a somber tune on a wooden flute. Not as a farewell, just because it fits the mood. The forest wasn't deadly, per se, but it wasn't exactly a playground either. Some branches snapped in the wrong places. Fog so thick you questioned whether your hand was real. Strange owl sounds. And one big question bouncing inside Nico's head. Why couldn't he just start by teaching me basket weaving? For the first 3 hours, Nico walked in circles. He got frustrated. He got hungry. He began talking to his stale bread like it was a loyal companion. He named it Sir Crumbly. He found a bush of shiny red berries as the sun dipped lower. Tempting. Gorgeous. But his father's voice echoed in his mind. That weird internal dad voice is all kids seem to have. Pretty things are often dangerous, like compliments at the market. He didn't eat them. He kept walking. Eventually, with aching legs and creeping dusk, he quietly climbed a tree. Not for strategy, but because something on the ground didn't sound like wind. Night fell. Nico clutched his rope, finished the last crumb of Sir Crumbly, and muttered, "Next time, if I survive, I'm giving Dad a map, straight to the forehead." At sunrise, he climbed down. Eyes puffy, hair is a mess, pants sticky with sap and grass. But something had changed. A new light in his eyes. Confidence. 3 hours later, he arrived home. Thorn was splitting firewood. No running. No dramatic, "my son" moment. Just a nod. He tossed Nico a wooden cup and said, "Mint tea, brew it yourself." Then silence. But not a cold one. It was the silence of 2 people who had each faced nature alone and returned. If your parents ever left you to finish your homework without a hint, just be glad they didn't leave you in the woods with nothing but a dull blade and a loaf with a personality. Thorn wasn't a bad father. He believed that if you've never been lost, you've never truly found yourself. His way of loving was to let you face the trees and trust that you'd come back stronger, dirtier, hungrier, maybe faintly bear-scented, but stronger. But if you think that was the ultimate in hands-on life lessons, you haven't met Who's Next. Welcome to a land of crimson velvet, embroidered carpets, family crests hanging on every wall, and a genealogy book updated more often than a worker's timesheet. This is the domain of Lord Alwyn, a medieval nobleman who considered royal blood a sacred treasure, never to be diluted by any ordinary person. Alwyn had 3 children, but today we'll talk about his eldest daughter, Lady Isolde, a clever, kind young woman who, most importantly, didn't want to marry her cousin. That was a problem. After years of decoding the family tree like a spy cipher, her father had chosen the most suitable husband for her. His sister's son, her first cousin. Yes, very close-knit. When Isolde protested, Alwyn didn't get angry. He lifted the genealogy book, thick as stale bread, and pointed at the line reading, "Blood match, purity level, 98.7%. Then said in a tone as gentle as introducing the soup of the day, "You must understand love comes and goes. Blood is eternal." It wasn't like he lacked options. Many proposals had come from wealthy lords, educated merchants, and handsome knights. But all were rejected because, somewhere in their ancestry, someone might have once traded wine without a license. Scandalous. Alwyn organized a destined meeting between Isolde and her cousin Cedric, who could play the flute and recite poetry, and had never ventured more than 5 meters outside the castle. Sitting across from Cedric in a small banquet hall, with her father watching from the corner like a hawk eyeing a chick, Isolde asked, "What do you think about marrying within the family?" Cedric shrugged, swirled his finger in his water glass, and replied, "Father says it keeps everything easy to remember." Her mother, who once tried to stop this madness, had been sent to the country estate for rest because her nerves need calming from excessive modern ideas. Isolde tried to run away once. She made it half a day before the guards caught her and brought her back with a message from her father. "Your blood is straying off course. I cannot allow it to run wild." From then on, every time she argued, Alwyn would gently place a hand on her shoulder, look her in the eye, and say, "You are the result of generations of careful selection. Don't be the one to break the perfect line." A line that spiraled awkwardly through genetics. Ironically, he didn't hate his daughter. Quite the opposite. He adored Isolde. But in his eyes, loving her meant keeping her within the system. A system where marital communication was easy, because both parties had suckled the same great-grandmother. If your parents ever pushed you toward a stable career or marrying someone respectable, just remember, at least they didn't plan a backyard wedding with 95% shared DNA on both sides. As for Isolde, after many battles, she made a deal. "If you find someone with perfect lineage that shares no ancestry with me in 4 generations, I'll marry him." Alwyn has been checking family maps ever since. It's been 5 years now. Meanwhile, Isolde runs a horse riding school for local kids, and quietly lets her hair grow long enough to cover her ears whenever her father mentions strong ears from the paternal line. Think that's the end? Not even close. In the next chapter, we'll meet a father who doesn't care about bloodlines or marrying cousins. He only cares about the family's reputation. A man who believes bringing shame to the family name is a crime equal to treason, and will go to any length to preserve appearances, even if his child is having an identity crisis over becoming a silk dance artist. Have you ever met someone who lives solely for what the neighbors might think? Now imagine being their child in the Middle Ages, when every stare was real, and there was no social media to vent with a sad caption. Welcome to the Whitestone Castle of Lord Edric, a man who never left his room without smoothing every fold in his tunic, never attended a banquet without bringing the family's achievement scroll, and never, ever allowed his children to do anything peculiar, like painting, playing music, or wearing clothes that didn't match the family crest colors. That peculiar child was Beatrix, his second daughter. A gentle girl, a lover of poetry, a dreamer of dance, who longed to become a silk dancer traveling from town to town. When she told him this, Edric nearly choked on his afternoon tea. He set down his cup, dabbed his lips with a gold-embroidered napkin, looked at his daughter, and uttered, "Our family has endured for 7 generations without one of us spinning in public." Then he walked dramatically onto the balcony, as if the sunlight might help him understand why his daughter wanted to twirl instead of marrying the Chancellor's son. Beatrix didn't want to be a lady shipped off for alliance. She wanted to learn the art of aerial silk, perform at village festivals, and breathe on her rhythm. But to Edric, that was like wearing a straw hat to a funeral. Improper, ungraceful, and, worst of all, unworthy of the family's name. Once, Beatrix snuck away to train with a traveling dance troupe in the neighboring village. They taught her balance, how to tie silk so it wouldn't fall, and how to move like the wind. She laughed, really laughed. But when she came home, her father was already waiting at the gate. No yelling, no whips. Just a gesture to the servant to close the side entrance. For the first time in her life, Beatrix had to walk through the castle's front gate, beneath the red lion crest on a white field, with the eyes of every hallway watching. No one said a word, but it felt like the whole world silently nodded in disappointment. That evening, her father laid a scroll in front of her. Her name had already been written into a marriage contract with another noble house. Beatrix trembled. "You didn't ask me what I want," Edric replied in a voice low and heavy as a funeral drum. "I don't need to ask anyone to protect our honor." Beatrix didn't sign, but she didn't leave either. She folded her silks, hid them in a box, and from that night on, I only danced when no one was looking. He wasn't angry or sad. He just managed the fallout. No rumors, no spectacle. And sometimes late at night, he would quietly stand by a cracked door, watching his daughter twirl by candlelight. A perfect moment he could never admit was beautiful. If your parents ever told you, "Don't embarrass the family," just because you wanted to sing, dance, paint, or wear a blue hat, remember, at least they didn't hang the family crest on the wall and measure it against your dreams. Edric wasn't cruel. He loved the idea of his family so much that he forgot that children aren't statues etched into a family medal. But if you think pride is the final form of fatherly flaw, think again. In the next part, we'll meet a father who doesn't care about reputation, power, or even facial hair, but is dangerously obsessed with philosophy. A man who turns every moment into a lecture on the cosmos, destiny, and the eternal cycle of the soul, even when his kid wants to go out and play with friends. Some fathers inspire, some uphold tradition, and then there's Master Lucian, who passes down only philosophical confusion. Lucian wasn't a nobleman, a physician, or a warrior. He was a village philosopher, a profession as vague as it was immune to criticism. He read Plato in the morning, debated with sparrows at noon, and answered his child's simple questions as if he were in the final round of a rhetoric championship. His son Jasper, 14 years old, once asked, "Dad, can I go play with my friends?" Lucian set down his copy of Meditations, folded his arms, gazed into the distance as if channeling Aristotle, and replied, "What do you think permission means? Does freedom truly exist if you must first ask for it?" Jasper: "So, is that a yes or a no?" Lucian: "That question, my son, is proof of the existential loop." The result: Jasper stayed home. Official reason? Deep confusion. Mealtime in Lucian's home was a chance for every sentence to become the opening paragraph of a thesis. Once, Jasper said, "I don't like boiled vegetables." Lucian replied, "Is it that you dislike them? Or is your palate reflecting the descent of your being from the primal essence of flavor?" Jasper's mother quietly added more salt. The problem wasn't that Lucian didn't love his son. He did. Deeply. He just didn't know when to stop. I'm proud of you became, you are living proof that legacy is not just biological, but metaphysical communication across time. Jasper once tried to keep a diary. The first entry read, "Today Dad asked if my existence is real or just a projection of his own consciousness." He stopped writing after 3 days. Once, Jasper fell from a tree and scraped his knee. Lucian rushed over, looked at the wound, sat beside him, and said, "See? Pain is the universe's reminder that you are alive." Then, he pulled out a notebook and began analyzing the sensation of pain through the lens of both Seneca and Kant. Jasper just wanted a clean bandage. Lucian took Jasper to the fields on lovely days to breathe with philosophy. They sat under a tree. The son felt drowsy. The father began, "Do you see that leaf? As it falls, is it an action? Or the culmination of a cosmic sequence of choices?" Jasper nodded, but in truth, he was dreaming of potatoes. It was hard to rebel against a father like this. Nothing was ever serious to him, except philosophy. "Come home late?" He'd ask, "What is late, if time is merely a human construct? Bad grades? Failure is merely a temporary name for a step on the staircase of consciousness. Break a plate? Fragility is the nature of all objects. You've learned something profound." And yet somehow Jasper didn't turn out spoiled. He learned to listen, to analyze, and to avoid open-ended questions. And one day, he placed a hand on his father's shoulder and said, "You know, Dad, sometimes I just need a hug." Lucian stood still, his hands slightly trembling. Then, very gently, he hugged his son without a word. Philosophy stepped aside for the first time, and affection took the stage. If your parents ever talked too much, over-explained everything, or tried to turn life into a lecture, remember that they didn't quote existentialism when you sneezed. But don't laugh too soon, because next, we'll meet a father you might recognize best. Not cruel, strange, poetic, just simply always absent. The kind of dad you only see in stories, shadows, or those vague promises of, "I'll be home early." A dark wooden table and 4 chairs stood in a small house on the edge of the village. One was always empty, not because it was broken, not because they lacked people, but because the one meant to sit there was always absent. Welcome to the story of Owen, a man the villagers called the one who's always working. A renowned blacksmith, fixer of everything from horseshoes to oven doors. Always busy, always needed, always not home. His son, little Albie, 8 years old, didn't know much about his father. He just voice, callous and hands, and often left his coat draped on a chair. Albie knew his father was killed. Everyone said so. But in his memory, his father always appeared like a distant sound. "Dad's busy. I'll be home early tomorrow. Go to sleep without me." Words repeated softly, then lost in the night. One evening, Albie stayed up past midnight just to be handed a small note. "Sorry, son. Emergency at the forge in the next village." He folded the paper and tucked it into a wooden box, along with many others. A collection of absences. His mother was always gentle, always said, "Your father loves you very much. It's just, work is important." But sometimes Albie wondered, does that mean I'm not? He made a small cake out of porridge and honey on his 9th birthday. His mother helped to light the candle. The empty chair remained. He blew out the candle and looked at his mother, asking, "If I blow hard enough, will Dad appear?" She smiled, but her eyes turned red. Owen wasn't cruel. He didn't mean harm. He didn't lie. He believed that preparing for the future was how love was shown. The hammering, the coins, and the timely repairs would somehow become affection over time. Once, Albie fell ill. He has a high fever and is delirious, calling Dad in his sleep. His mother wrote a letter. I sent a messenger to find Owen. 3 days later, he returned, smelling of smoke and steel, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He sat by his son's bedside, took his hand, and whispered, "I'm here now. I'm sorry." Albie didn't open his eyes, but his fingers curled gently. For the first time in a long time, the chair was no longer empty. The next morning, when Albie woke, Owen was still there. He didn't say much, just sat. And when Albie looked up at his father, his eyes didn't ask, "Where were you?" They asked, "Are you still here?" Owen nodded. At that moment, Albie understood that his father loved him, just the wrong way. If you ever had a parent who was rarely home, know that sometimes they don't realize that time has an expiration date. A hug at the right moment is worth more than a late gift. That an empty chair can be filled with presents, not just purchases. Albie grew up keeping that chair in the house, but this time he sat in it, telling stories to his child. Never leave it empty. And if you think absence is the worst a father can be, brace yourself. Next, you'll meet a dad who never left the house, never missed dinner, but made his child feel breathless. A man who controlled everything, from what they ate, how they ate, when they slept, to how they breathed properly. Not every father who stays home is easy to live with, and not every dad who doesn't leave is a good one. Let me introduce you to Ulrich, a model father in theory, present 24/7, and managing his children like a military fortress. Ulrich used to be a gate guard. After retiring from the army, he settled in a village, started a family, and shifted from guarding the city gate to guarding order at the dinner table. Villagers used to say, "Ulrich doesn't breathe, he measures it." And it was true. To him, everything had to follow a schedule, and the schedule never had a line for acting on feelings. His son, little Jonas, 8 years old, had one very special skill: silent breathing. Because his father once said, "No one needs to hear you breathe like you're pushing a wagon across a border." Since then, Jonas has mastered the art of inaudible respiration so well that his mother once had to touch him just to check if he was still alive. Ulrich wasn't cruel. He just firmly believed discipline makes the man. And so, Jonas's day was broken into 15-minute increments, like military training. 6 a.m. Wake up. No alarm. 6:05. Make the bed. No wrinkles. 6:15. Wash face. 3 times. No more, no less. 6:25. Eat porridge. No swirling allowed. Only side-to-side stirring. If Jonas wanted more food? Did you file a request for extra rations yesterday? Went to bed 5 minutes late? You've just collapsed the family's entire strategic rest framework. As for clothing, once dressed, he had to stand before his father for a readiness check. Ulrich would nod solemnly and write in his notebook, "Day 112, left trouser leg slightly wrinkled, standing posture needs improvement." Jonas could only manage a crooked smile. Once, he asked to play outside. His father agreed, but handed him a play protocol guide with 3 objectives and a chart. When his mother asked, "Don't you think that's a bit much?" Ulrich answered seriously, "If play is not managed, it becomes chaos." Every night before bed, Jonas had to report his day like a soldier returning to base. I completed 9 out of 10 objectives. Standing straight while speaking was interrupted due to strong wind. His father nodded and noted, "Wind must be factored into future planning." And yet, within all that strictness, one thing never faltered: Ulrich never skipped bedtime story hour. Rain or shine, he read to Jonas every night. Books carefully screened for content, length, and moral integrity. Each story always ended with the following. And because the main character had discipline, they were rewarded with a cake. Although Jonas sometimes dreamed of a day when his sock folding wasn't inspected, he still knew his father cared. Just a little too much. Too rigid. It's too much like a training manual. The funny thing is, when Jonas grew up and left home, free at last, he still woke up at 6 a.m., out of habit. The only difference now? He decided whether to eat porridge. And sometimes, he stirred it in circles, a tiny act of rebellion in a breakfast bowl. If you ever felt your parents were too controlling, remember, at least you didn't have to request permission to cough. Ulrich didn't know how to let go. But he was always there, and sometimes, that alone, is a strong enough foundation to help you step forward, even if you're slightly short on oxygen from years of silent breathing. But get ready, because up next, you'll meet a father who doesn't care how you breathe, only whether you bring him glory. A man who lives for his reputation and uses his child to win at everything, even the village porridge cooking contest. In a quiet village where people sometimes brag about oversized turnips or new bread recipes, there lived a man named Garwin, a father who was never satisfied with simply having a child. He needed his child to win. Garwin was the kind of dad who couldn't stay silent when a neighbor said, "My son just learned to ride a horse." He'd nod and immediately fire back like a crossbow bolt. "Mine's been riding since he was 4, blindfolded, through a duck-filled swamp." His son Timothy, 12 years old, knew this all too well, because every single thing he did, from peeling carrots to polishing shoes to smiling at the neighbors, would be noted, analyzed, and compared. Garwin kept a family achievement ledger, a massive leather-bound tome bigger than Timothy's head, filled with every triumph since great-grandpa won Best-Dressed Turnip Farmer decades ago. Every time Timothy accomplished something, like tying his shoelaces faster than the day before, Garwin would summon the village, build a little podium, and announce, "My son has surpassed the shoelace tying record of old Wiggins, set in the year 1332. Timothy just wanted to tie his shoes and play. Once, he came home with dirt on his hands. Garwin didn't scold him. He took out a quill and scribbled in the ledger. Day 141. Neglect of personal hygiene. Unfit for display during the Great Potato Planting Festival. Would Timothy's birthday be a celebration? Nope. It was the day of multidisciplinary evaluation. Guests would witness Timothy snap twigs with his elbow, light oil lamps one-handed, and recite Latin poetry. His only gift was his father's approving nod and the words, "You are the pride of our family's honor rankings." Even when Timothy just wanted to sleep in, Garwin would say, "The Gibbons boy was up at dawn helping his mother plant chives. What about you?" Every summer, Garwin signed him up for every village contest. Fastest egg collector, swimming across the duck pond without getting bitten, loudest singer without cracking pottery. Timothy won some, lost others, but Garwin only recorded the wins. As for the losses, out of ink, no space, the wind blew the page away. Timothy's mother once whispered, "Your father doesn't know how to praise gently." Timothy nodded and whispered back, "I wish I could do something, without it being a contest." One day, he snuck away from elegant posture rehearsal, climbed the hill behind the village, and sat silently. No one found him all afternoon, but as the sun set, his father appeared. No yelling, no scolding. He just sat beside him and handed over the ledger. Not to write in it, but to put it away. He sighed and softly said, "I thought if you were great, then I'd be acknowledged. But maybe I forgot who truly needs to feel seen." Timothy didn't answer, but for the first time his father's eyes weren't staring past him toward an imaginary crowd. They were looking right at him. If you've ever felt like your parents use your achievements to humble brag, just remember, at least they didn't log your carrot-peeling victories in a cowhide journal. Garwin wasn't cruel. He was just desperately hungry for recognition, and thought his son's victories could fill the void in his own heart. But if you think a competitive father is the worst kind, wait for what comes next. In the following part, you'll meet a father known for his kindness, yet who had a peculiar habit of giving his child the most terrifying gifts. Not out of malice, but simply because he never quite understood what a child wanted. This is how mousetraps, dried wolf teeth, and a bell meant for summoning servants ended up as heirlooms. Not all medieval fathers were strict and cold. Some were actually quite sweet. Take Bartram, for instance. Famously as gentle as a boiled turnip. He wasn't angry, he wasn't demanding, he wasn't competitive. He just had one peculiar habit. He loved giving gifts to his son. And that sounds wonderful, until you see the gifts. His only child, little Nedrick, grew up constantly in nervous anticipation, not from fear of punishment, but from never knowing what might be inside the following gift box. When Nedrick turned 6, Bartram brought a long package carefully wrapped in goatskin and tied with straw. The boy opened it with giddy excitement and froze. A broken wooden mousetrap. Bartram beamed, patted his son on the back and said, "I once caught the biggest mouse in the village with this. It's a treasure." The next year, a dried wolf tooth. The reason? It brings courage, and I don't know anyone who needs it more than you. At age 9, the gift was a tiny bell meant to summon servants, despite the family not having any. Bartram explained, "You never know. Maybe one day you'll be famous and have your own. Practice ringing." Every gift came with a story as long as a medieval winter. This rusty nail was once part of the trapdoor to the old barn where I almost got stung by bees. This scorched cloth bag once held roasted corn during a festival. I forgot to take it out. Smells unforgettable. This piece of snakeskin? A sign you're growing up. Nedrick once quietly asked his mother, "Mom, does Dad think I'm his son or a walking fairy tale chest?" She just chuckled and said, "Your father's the only man who believes emotions can be preserved in objects." Every time Bartram went on a trip, he returned with a new treasure. A shard of cracked mirror. An ancient-looking button. A smooth round stone he called the Stone of Destiny, which was just a pebble from the duck pond. Eventually, Nedrick mastered the art of reacting appropriately. Upon receiving a gift, he would do not smile too early, not ask, "What is it?" too quickly. Always respond with, "Wow, no one's ever given me anything like this before," because that was very, very true. You might think Bartram didn't love his son, but on the contrary, he loved him so much he wanted to share every piece of his memory, even if that meant gifting dried hedgehog quills. One day, as Nedrick prepared to leave for school far from home, Bartram gave him a jar of solidified duck fat. Why? To rub on your knees when you miss home. Works wonders. I used it when my first marriage proposal got rejected. Nedrick brought the jar with him. He never used it. But he never threw it away either. Because every time he saw it, he remembered. My dad loves me in a way no one else does, but he never lets me forget it. If you've ever gotten a weird gift from your parents, the kind you don't know whether to hang up, hide, or exercise, remember that they didn't give you a broken oven door and call it a protective shield. Bartram didn't know how to pick gifts, but he knew how to share himself. And in a world full of absent, angry, or overbearing dads, receiving a piece of someone's soul wrapped in aged goat skin, that's something worth remembering. And if you think strange gifts are the weirdest a father can get, wait for what's next. In part 23, we'll meet a father who might be the only man ever to cry in a tavern, because his son refused to become a monk. A father who believed that our bloodline exists to serve the divine, or, at the very least, to grow a beard like Grandpa's. If there's one thing that might make you feel grateful every time you yawn through Sunday morning service, it's this. At least you didn't grow up with Elric's dad. His name was Father Godwin. He wasn't a priest. No church rank, no position, no embroidered black robe. But he unofficially appointed himself village religious ambassador with a sacred mission to turn his son into a monk. Elric, age 15, just wanted to be a carpenter. He loved wood. I loved the sound of sawing and the smell of fresh sap. But to his father, the only scent worth anything was burning holy candles and freshly printed scripture. From when Elric could talk, Father Godwin was teaching him prayers, even before numbers. Instead of 1, 2, 3, he learned, Amen, Alleluia, Kyrie eleison. Breakfast was for sermons, lunch for hymns, dinner was comparison hour. Do you know how many arrows Saint Sebastian took? More than the number of times you've helped your mother wash dishes. When Elric said he wanted to join the boat-building guild with his friends, his father handed him a 600-page Bible and said, "First, build the ship of your soul." Every time Elric did anything non-religious, Godwin would sigh, look up at the sky, and whisper, "Lord, I have tried." Birthday gifts? Age 8, a rosary. Age 10, a handwritten copy of the Resurrection Prayer. Age 13, a book titled Divine Punishments and Their Role in Moral Upbringing. Elric never once received a chisel. The final straw came at 16 when Elric was invited to a monastery's orientation program. Not because he applied, but because his father had filled out the form himself. It even included a recommendation letter, also self-written, with a forged signature scrawled in a shaky hand. I, Elric, have felt the call of the Lord in the sound of my father's voice since I was young. Elric didn't go. Instead, he quietly enrolled in carpentry school. Father Godwin fell apart. He didn't scream. He didn't hit. He sat in the village tavern and cried. Real tears. People say he dabbed his eyes with a cloth and asked strangers, "Has anyone ever seen a child choose wood over eternity?" That night, he left a handwritten note on Elric's table. "Son, if you won't become a monk, live so the Lord won't be disappointed." And beneath it, "I'm keeping the rosary, in case you change your mind." Elric kept the note, not out of guilt, but because it was the first time his father expressed real emotion, without hiding behind holy words. If you've ever felt pressured to study a subject you didn't love, or follow a faith you didn't understand, remember, at least you weren't expected to fake a divine calling while all you wanted was to hear the sound of sanding wood. Father Godwin wasn't cruel. He mistook the voice of God for the echo of his hopes as a father. And the only thing Elric could do in return was built by his father, a strong, solid wooden chair, so he could pray without fear of ever falling again. Welcome to the little wooden house on the edge of the village, the one guarded by 3 cats at the door, a crooked nail on the roof, and a father named Edric, whom everyone quietly calls the suspicious dad. Not because he didn't love his son, but because he loved the truth so much. He trusted no one. To Edric, every household event had a hidden meaning. A spoon went missing. Someone's trying to undermine our faith in breakfast. Did the oil lamp run out earlier than expected? Clearly, someone tampered with the wick to increase our expenses. The cow mooed more than usual. Someone's coaxing it into revealing secrets. His son, 10-year-old Finn, wanted a quiet life like any other kid. But every morning, before breakfast, he had to pass his father's trustworthiness checkpoint, which consisted of 3 questions, such as, "Did you hear any strange footsteps last night? Did you dream of anyone trying to steal the village map? Do you feel watched?" One time, Finn joked, "Dad, I think our cat is a spy." Edric immediately nodded and whispered, "So you finally noticed. Do you think Edric read books?" Not quite. He kept logs, lots of them. One for unusual sounds around the house, another for people who laughed too long at the market, and a thick black notebook titled, "Suspicious Behavior of Finn, since February." Inside were entries like, "Day 14, didn't finish bread. Possibly suspected it was poisoned. Day 21, laughed when I tripped on the doorstep. Potential sympathizer with external forces. Day 29, asked, why don't you nap? Clearly probing surveillance schedule. Finn once slipped a note into his dad's coat pocket. I love you, Dad. Edric studied the handwriting for 3 days, consulted the village scribe, and concluded, sender unverifiable. If it was you, thank you. If not, I remain alert. Over time, Finn learned to live like fog. Don't drop spoons. Don't stare through keyholes. Don't laugh longer than 3 seconds. Most importantly, you should deny everything even when you did it. One winter day, Finn accidentally spilled a jug of water. Edric appeared instantly, asking, who sent you? Was it the blacksmith down the street? Or the strange merchants from yesterday? Finn stammered. I slipped. Edric stayed silent. Then, he wrote in his notebook. Slipped. Possible code word. And yet, for all his eccentricity, Edric did love his son. Every night he checked Finn's window 3 times, not to spy on him, but to ensure no one took him in the night. And once, when Finn had a high fever, Edric didn't write. He didn't question. He just sat beside the bed, his hand on Finn's forehead, murmuring, no one's taking you. Not on my watch. If your parents have ever overanalyzed things, jumped to conclusions, or acted strangely when guests came over, at least they didn't dig a hole in the backyard, just in case they needed to hide evidence. Edric wasn't cruel. He was just terrified of losing what he loved. And for him, loving meant guarding against anything that could take it away. But if you think a paranoid dad is the oddest kind, stay calm. Because in the next part, you'll meet a father who's always cheerful, always laughing, and always armed with jokes nobody asked for. A man so obsessed with comedy turned every profound moment into a stage, even when you were crying. Not everyone can handle a strict father. But you know what's even harder? A dad who never stops joking, who turns everything into a comedy routine, even when you're crying. Meet Reginald, known in the village as Mr. Smiley. Not because he's always happy, but because he fights off negative emotions with bad improv. His daughter Brita, age 13, once said, Dad, I'm really sad. My best friend moved away. Reginald placed a hand on her shoulder, looked solemnly into her eyes, and said, I understand, sweetheart. Sadness is a natural part of life. Then immediately morphed into a crying goat. Bah! Brita! Don't leave your little goat behind! Bah! Brita didn't know whether to laugh or bang her head against a wall. Every night, instead of a normal goodnight, he performed the talking pillow show. The pillow acted as a blessing priest. The blanket was a flying carpet. Adorable. for the first 20 times. By the 200th, you begin to understand what exhaustion feels like. Once, Brita scraped her arm. Reginald rushed over, examined the wound seriously, then declared, "We need urgent treatment," with a smile, and launched into a jingle. "Blood is red. Pain will pass. Let's throw a bubble-blowing bash." She just wanted a bandage and some silence. The problem was that Reginald never meant harm. He couldn't stand seeing his daughter sad, and he thought, if she laughed, then everything would be okay. He gave Brita a mirror framed in glued-on chicken feathers for her birthday. Why? So every time you look in it, you'll remember not to take life too seriously when there's poultry on your face. Even when Brita's mom scolded him, he'd mimic her in a parrot voice. "Stop messing around, Reginald. Stop messing around, Reginald. Stop messing around, Reginald." Then flap his arms and squawk. The whole village adored him. But Brita, she just wanted to be sad, seriously. One day, Brita came home in tears after a massive fight with her best friend. She locked herself in her room. They didn't say a word. Reginald came by. They didn't knock. I didn't think. I didn't pretend to cry. He just stood there and quietly said, "I don't know what to do if I can't make you laugh, but I'm here. If all you want is silence." It was the first time Brita hugged her dad without rolling her eyes at his antics. If you've ever had a parent who jokes at the wrong time, pulls silly faces in public, or begs you to cheer up when you need to sit still, remember, at least they didn't bring hand puppets to your parent-teacher meeting. Reginald wasn't insensitive. He just believed joy was the medicine. But sometimes he forgot his daughter. Needed space for her tears, too. And don't be fooled. Just because funny dads seem lighthearted doesn't mean they're the easiest to live with. Not all fathers shout, scold, or crack jokes in the marketplace. Some stand there. No words, no frowns, no praise. But you know, they're watching. Meet Theon, the quietest father in the village of Elmbridge. He lived with his wife and 3 children, but rarely said more than 3 sentences daily. Not because he disliked people, but because he believed that watching was more potent than commanding. His second child, 14-year-old Malus, always felt free. Her father never checked her homework, never forced her to do the dishes, never barked at her to stand up straight. But every time she did something she shouldn't, like sneaking onto the chicken coop roof to try flying with 2 dresses tied together, she'd turn around, and there he was, silent, motionless, just watching, not angry, not disappointed, but enough to make you feel as small as a breadcrumb. Malus called him the Gray Shadow, because even on the sunniest days, if he stood behind you, you'd feel a chill on your neck. Not cold, but not warm. One night, she snuck out to see the village fair. She returned home and climbed through the window, quiet as a cat, lit her candle, and on the table were a cup of water, a damp cloth, and a small note that read, "Next time, bring a cloak." No signature. But she knew. He never asked, "Where were you?" He never said, "I'm disappointed," but you'd find the chair you broke fixed, the bundle you forgot retired, the window in your room was wiped clean before the rain came. Malus once joked to her mother, "Dad's like a polite ghost. When I'm sad, food just appears. When I trip, the rock's already moved." But sometimes, the silence suffocated her. She longed for praise. "I'm proud of you," even just an audible sigh. But Theon only nodded, softly, like a leaf letting go. The crowd applauded the day she gave her speech at the Harvest Festival. She scanned the faces, hoping to see her father smile. He didn't clap. He didn't grin. He just nodded, slowly. And for Malus, That was a whole orchestra of emotion. If you've ever had a father who didn't speak much, didn't hug, didn't show his feelings, remember, sometimes love is present. Not loud, but as steady as the stone holding your door open. Theon never forced his children down a path, but he was always there at the end of it. Not blocking, not guiding, just ready to catch you, even if you didn't call out. And if you think a quiet father is the most mysterious kind, wait for the next one. Some fathers leave early, and what they leave behind is a void. But some, like Sir Aldemar, the famed knight whose name appears in 3 chronicles and 2 folk ballads, leave behind something else entirely. A shadow. Not an absence, but a legacy so significant that every child feels small standing next to the memory of him. His son, Waylon, now 17, never really knew him. Sir Aldemar died when Waylon was just a toddler, too young to tell a horse from a hay barrel, but Waylon knew of him, all too well. He knew because his mother told tales of the man who held off an entire band of raiders alone. He knew because every visitor to their home would sigh, pat his shoulder and say, "You're Aldemar's boy? Strong lad. Bet you're good with a sword too, eh?" Waylon would smile politely, then retreat to his room to look at the old wooden practice sword his father had left behind. Still unused. It's still too heavy. Relatives, tutors, and villagers all used Aldemar's name as a unit of measurement. Your father won the archery contest at 16. Once, Aldemar saved an entire company from a bog with nothing but rope. If only you spoke with the calm your father had. No one scolded him. But every gaze was lined with expectation. And silent expectations weigh the most. Waylon tried. He learned to ride. I fell off 4 times. His mother patched him up and smiled. But all the village asked was, Aldemar never fell, you know. He tried drawing. No one stopped him. But no one asked about it either. As if a hero's son should wield a sword, not a paintbrush. At night, Waylon would sit beneath the old tree, look at the stars, and whisper, "Father, do you know I'm not you?" No reply. But at least the moon didn't disagree. One day, his mother gave him a small wooden chest. Inside were Sir Aldemar's cloak was torn at the shoulder, an unsent letter, and a notebook. Not about battles, but poems. Short verses, hastily scribbled. In them, Aldemar wrote about fatherhood, fear, and wishing his son would choose his path. One passage read, "If my son is a warrior, I will be proud. If he is a tailor, I will buy the finest cloth. If he is a storyteller, I only ask he tells the truth." That his father was sometimes afraid, sometimes lost, and was only a man. Waylon laughed. For the first time, the image of his father stopped being a statue and became a person. And so did Waylon. No longer needing to measure up to a shadow, but free to step out and find his own space. If you've ever lived beneath someone's shadow, someone greater, louder, more admired, remember, a shadow only exists because of light. And that light is something you carry within yourself, not something you have to borrow. Sir Aldemar was a good man, but he wasn't a benchmark. He was a landmark. Waylon will move forward, not as a legend, but as himself. And if you think the feeling of never being enough is where it ends, wait for the next part. Some fathers struggle to show emotion. Some aren't around at all. But then some are always there. Too much, too close, until you're no longer quite yourself. Welcome to the home of Marcus, a gentle father, soft-spoken, fond of apple pie, and the keeper of one unfinished dream. The dream of becoming a wandering bard. Marcus loved music so profoundly as a young man that he sold the family's only chicken to buy a flute. But the road was harsh. Melodies didn't feed the stomach, and wind alone couldn't warm empty hands. So he gave up, returned home, became a cobbler, married. I had a son, and tucked the flute away in a wooden box, as if sealing away part of his heart. Then, one day his son, little Thilo, 6 years old, began to sing. Not brilliantly, not badly. He just sang, and Marcus looked at him like a comet had landed in the backyard. He nodded, he took note, and inside, that old flame flickered to life again, not for himself, but for his child. From that day forward, Thilo no longer sang for joy. He sang for his father's gaze. Marcus brought him to the village square daily to draw inspiration. He spoke of legendary minstrels, songs that moved hearts, and a future where Thilo would do what he never could. Thilo learned the flute, then the lute. Then, how to sigh quietly so his father wouldn't hear. Whenever he asked, "Can I play with my friends?" his father answered, "Artists must train in solitude." Whenever he said, "I like working with clay more," his father shook his head. "That's just a phase. Music is your destiny." No shouting, no punishment, no harsh demands, just a gentle wall of hope, built brick by brick from quiet belief. And somehow, that was even harder to resist. Thilo began to write music out of duty, not passion. He sang with a voice stripped of soul, and every round of applause at the festivals made his father beam. He felt like he was expressing someone else's regret. One night, Thilo sat alone in the shed, opened the wooden box, and stared at his father's flute. He didn't know why, but tears came. Not because he hated his father, but because he no longer knew who he was. The next morning, Thilo brought a lump of clay to the village potter instead of going to the town square to perform. He molded a penguin, roughly the size of a potato. Yes, it's ridiculous in medieval Europe, but he's a kid. That afternoon, Marcus found him under the porch, hands muddy, grinning like he'd never learned what a musical note was. Marcus sat beside him, silent. He looked at the bizarre little ceramic bird, then, softly, asked, "Are you happy?" Thilo nodded. Marcus smiled faintly, and at that moment, something melted inside him. The old dream was finally let go. If your parents have ever hoped you'd take up their path, live the dream they couldn't, remember this: it's not because they don't love you. They haven't yet learned how to love you, as you are. Marcus wasn't wrong. He just forgot. We can't live for someone else. Thilo still sings for fun. He sculpts to live. And the old flute? It sits on his table. No longer a chain, just a memory. But if you think gentle expectations are the most onerous burden, brace yourself for the next part. Some fathers don't speak much, and some don't need to speak at all, because the atmosphere says everything. Meet Heron, known in the village as the man who breathes silence. He doesn't shout. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't force his children to do anything specific. But the air disappears from everyone's lungs whenever he enters a room. His daughter Lena, 15 years old, says there are 3 phases to the day. Before father gets home, while the father is on his way, and when father has arrived. The last one feels like a game of who can drop a spoon first and survive. Heron isn't angry. He has a silence so deep it feels like a warning. When he looks at you, you start questioning yourself, even if all you were doing was peeling an onion. Lena once asked her mother, "Is father sad?" Her mother replied, "No, he's just in a Heron state." Lena didn't quite understand, but but she felt it. Very clearly. At dinner, everyone eats quickly. No one speaks much. Because if Heron sets his spoon down just a little too firmly, all conversations vanish like fog under sunlight. Her youngest sister once hummed quietly during a meal. No scolding, no comment. Just a single glance from Heron, and the song evaporated instantly. No one remembers the last time he laughed. Once, Lena got a high score on a school essay. She showed it to him. He looked at it for a moment, nodded, and folded it. No praise, no criticism, just a single word after dinner. Good. And that was the most celebrated compliment she ever received. Heron never gives orders, but somehow everyone knows what not to do. You don't enter his room uninvited. You don't use his scissors. You don't laugh too loudly if he's in the house. Whenever Lena wanted to say something, she rehearsed it in her head 3 times, whispered it once, and gave up. In that house, emotions had to be quiet. She once told her father she wanted to study painting. Heron listened and looked out the window. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. Just said nothing. And that silence stretched longer than a cold, rainy week. In the end, Lena still went to art school. But every time she mixed paint, her hands trembled, as if the fear of doing wrong had settled into her fingers. One day, she accidentally shattered an old ink jar. She froze, waiting for a storm. But Heron stepped in, looked at the mess, and swept it up. No words, just one line. Be more careful. And strangely, that moment brought her relief. Because finally, a reaction. Not just a vast, echoing silence. If you've ever lived with someone who made you cautious with every breath, every laugh, every step, remember, not all fear comes with noise, and not everyone is quiet. Brings peace. Heron wasn't cruel. He just carried too much pressure. Maybe from childhood, maybe from work. Perhaps it is because I do not know how to live more lightly. But Lena grew up. She learned to speak softly, then boldly. She learned to apologize, then not to apologize for how she felt. And one day, she painted her father's portrait, not out of resentment, but to finally take him down from that cold, towering pedestal. And if you think this is the end of the most difficult medieval dads, you're very, very close. We've journeyed through 29 fathers, kings, blacksmiths, philosophers, and shadows. Men shouted, cried, vanished, or refused to let go. Each loved in their way, clumsily, crookedly, too much, or not quite enough. But now, we're no longer talking about them. Now, we're talking about you. You might have had a father who loved you in a way you couldn't recognize. Or one who didn't love you enough. Or loved you in a way that made it hard to breathe correctly. Maybe he wasn't there when you needed him. Or maybe he was too present when all you wanted was space. Maybe he was rigid, silent, or too humorous. Maybe he forgot your birthday, never read your poems, or failed to notice the tears behind your "I'm fine." Maybe he once promised to come home early and didn't. Or maybe he never promised anything at all. But right now, in this quiet moment of the night, as you lie there with the fan humming softly, whether in a familiar room or one that feels distant, I want you to know, you don't have to be a good child by anyone else's definition. You don't have to live up to anyone's idea of you. You don't have to carry forward someone else's dreams. You don't have to bear the weight of silent expectations or invisible wounds. You only have to be you, happy or sad, strong or tired, tangled or glowing. If there's something between you and your father that left you hurting, left you feeling less, left you pretending to be okay, then breathe out. Not to forget, not to erase, to feel lighter, because you don't have to carry it forever. Maybe one day you'll look back and smile. He tried in the only way he knew how. Even if it was wrong, even if it wasn't enough, he still tried. Or maybe you won't smile. And that's okay too. Because forgiveness doesn't always have to come. As long as you keep going, keep breathing, keep being you. History remembers the powerful fathers, the brilliant, the loud, the praised. But few tell the stories of children who grew up from silence, from glances, from a nod without a single word of praise. You are one of them. And I'm proud of you for still being here and still going. So tonight, before you close your eyes, I hope you know this. Not every story needs an ending, but some chapters can close gently with nothing more than deep sleep. No swords, no shouting, no aching. Just the sound of steady breath, a calm heartbeat, and dreams that carry no shadows. Thank you for staying with me through all 30 chapters. You've walked through the Middle Ages and through a piece of your history. Now, turn off the light, hold yourself close, and rest deeply, because you've done more than enough.